Welcome to VSOW.
Hello.
Today we are undertaking a deep dive into an artifact of American culture that remains, well, profoundly influential and deeply complex. We're talking about the television classic, All in the Family.
Indeed, we're going to be unpacking the source materials surrounding Norman Lear's powerhouse sitcom. It dominated television from 1971 right through to 1979, and then, of course, continued with Archie Bunker's Place until '83.
And it's really impossible to overstate the show's cultural footprint. Our mission today is to analyze this core conflict presented in, well, pretty much all our sources.
And that central conflict is essentially a paradox, isn't it? Was All in the Family this masterful revolutionary satire? Did it successfully force America to confront, maybe even dismantle its deeply held prejudices?
Did it kind of fail its initial ethical mission? Did it inadvertently become a vehicle that, reinforced the very bigotry it aimed to mock? The sources offer some really sharp contrasts here, particularly around this phenomenon known as the Archie Bunker effect.
Right. And just to set the scene, the controversy wasn't just something that bubbled up later. It was absolutely anticipated by the network itself. When AITF premiered, CBS executives were terrified of the potential audience backlash.
Terrified why, specifically?
Primarily because of the frequent use of racial and ethnic slurs, which was unheard of then, and also just the blunt discussion of social topics that were completely taboo on TV at the time. They actually established dedicated phone lines just to handle what they expected to be a barrage of complaints.
And this is where the historical data immediately throws a wrench into that theory of outrage. Because the predicted outrage, it just never materialized.
Not at all. Instead of condemnation, CBS received what the sources call a deluge of support.
A deluge. So this wasn't some slow burn success story.
No, it was immediate. Staggering success, really. We're talking about a cultural juggernaut that just captured the nation's attention. It ranked #1 in the Nielsen ratings for, 5 consecutive years?
Yeah. 5 years straight. Astonishing. By the mid-'70s, say 1975, the sources confirm All in the Family was reaching about 1/5 of the entire country.
1/5. Think about that reach. The success was instant, it was overwhelming, undeniable. But the question of why it succeeded, were people laughing at Archie Bunker, or were they laughing with him? That's really the subject of, 4 decades of debate and analysis.
And that's the complexity we have to navigate today. Okay, so before we dive into Archie himself, I think we need to fully appreciate the television landscape that Norman Lear was trying to disrupt. What was the status quo for American sitcoms before 1971?
Well, it was, quite simply, television built on this kind of affluent, aspirational, almost exclusively white fantasy.
Right.
The sitcoms of the 50s and 60s, the Leave It to Beaver or Father Knows Best model, they were designed to showcase a very sanitized upper-middle-class ideal. If you look at the demographic data, our sources point out that only about 11% of all primetime programs featured characters from the blue-collar sector as heads of household.
Only 11%. That's a pretty profound misrepresentation of the American experience, especially post-war America.
Absolutely. It meant that real economic anxieties or huge social shifts like the civil rights movement, they were just entirely absent from the screen.
Invisible.
Completely invisible. The goal was pure escapism and, frankly, advertiser appeasement. The biggest problem a TV family typically faced was, as the sources often note, often something entirely trivial, like,
like a ruined roast when the boss was coming for dinner.
Exactly. That kind of thing. Taboo subjects, anything relating to sexuality, the women's liberation movement, civil rights, economic hardship, any genuine health issues, forget it. Invisible. These families were so pristine, it was a famous network constraint, that they couldn't even show a toilet being flushed on screen.
Right, the famous toilet taboo. So the TV industry had created this bubble, really, where bland, inoffensive content designed not to alienate sponsors was the highest priority.
Pretty much, yeah. And this fear of causing offense is exactly what Lear set out to dismantle entirely.
Okay, so let's explore his inspiration and his vision. Where did it come from?
Well, Lear's immediate inspiration, and this is fairly well known, came from the UK. It was a British sitcom called Till Death Us Do Part.
Ah, yes, Alf Garnett.
That's the one. Featuring the highly reactionary, bigoted working-class patriarch Alf Garnett. He provided a template, definitely. But Lear's brilliance was in localizing that concept, making it deeply personal and critically deeply American.
And the sources really confirm just how personal this was for him, those perpetual, often quite painful family arguments, including that iconic insult, Meathead, for his liberal son-in-law.
Right. That was directly modeled on Lear's own difficult, often fraught relationship with his father, Herman.
Really? Meathead came from his dad.
According to Lear, yes. And apparently Herman Lear also had a catchphrase for his wife, stifle yourself.
Wow. So Lear was essentially taking his own family trauma, his own intergenerational conflict, and magnifying it for a national audience.
Pretty much. And that willingness to expose that raw, sometimes ugly reality is what gave the show its immediate visceral authenticity, something completely lacking in well, the saccharine offerings of the time.
And it wasn't just the writing, right? The production methods themselves were revolutionary for American TV.
They were. AITF was the first major American series to be videotaped in front of a live studio audience.
Why was that technical detail so critical? What did it achieve?
Well, the videotape and the live audience were really a package deal, designed for authenticity. It meant, first off, no need for a canned laugh track.
Which was standard practice then.
Absolutely standard, and often manipulated to punch up weak jokes. The live energy forced the performances to be sharper, and crucially, the laughs had to be genuine. Plus, videotape itself lent the show the look of early, sort of unpolished live television. It harkened back to the rawness of shows like The Honeymooners. Yeah, our sources even reveal that Lear initially wanted to shoot it in black and white, specifically to reinforce that old, most sepia-toned, old-fashioned family feel that kind of matched Archie's worldview.
That combination, raw production, revolutionary content, it immediately created fireworks, didn't it? We should remember that the premiere episode didn't exactly ease the audience in.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
It dove headfirst into this cocktail of controversy.
Yeah.
In just 1/2 hour, it tackled atheism, affirmative action, socialism, anti-Semitism, and the massive generation gap.
All in episode 1, that must have instantly forced the showdown with CBS.
It did. The network, even though they likely recognized the show's potential quality or buzz, they were terrified. The most famous network objection involved the CBS president himself, William Paley. He apparently didn't want a line that suggested Michael and Gloria, even though they were married, were about to, have sex.
Seems almost quaint now, looking back, but that was the line in the sand.
For Lear, yes. He correctly recognized that if he conceded on a joke about marital intimacy, the network would just constantly demand concessions on all the weightier, more controversial issues down the line.
So he held firm.
He did. The sources detail that this standoff continued right up until about 25 minutes before the show was scheduled to air for the first time.
Wow.
CBS eventually relented, but they made their opposition crystal clear by broadcasting this prominent disclaimer right before the opening credits.
The famous disclaimer.
Yes, and this disclaimer essentially ran on screen every week during that entire first season. It was a public admission by the network that they found the material highly objectionable.
To paraphrase the sentiment ascribed in the sources, the network was effectively telling the audience, look, we know this is our show, but we want absolutely nothing to do with what you're about to see. Please don't hold us accountable.
Exactly. That level of executive reluctance just confirms how thoroughly Lear was shattering those primetime norms. Okay, so now we really need to turn to the character who defined this whole era, Archie Bunker himself. To understand the ambiguity of the satire, we first have to establish who he was.
Right, his identity.
He was that prototypical hard hat from Queens, New York, uneducated, a working-class hourly wage earner, primarily a dock worker, but he supplemented his income driving a taxi on the side.
And his background, as depicted, was essential to making him somewhat sympathetic, even while he was being offensive, wasn't it? He wasn't written as some successful villain.
No, not at all. He was presented as the product of severe economic pressures, a poor, struggling childhood, even a cold, sometimes abusive father mentioned in his backstory. His bigotry didn't seem to come from a place of power, but more from a place of insecurity and maybe fear.
That leads directly to the two main interpretations of Archie that you find in the sources, and they're often kind of at war with each other.
They really are. The first view tends to frame him as essentially an ignorant buffoon, someone whose prejudice was born out of low education and his environmental conditioning. In this view, his bigotry came off as ignorant and, importantly, humorous. The idea here is that viewers laughed at him because his arguments were often so flimsy, so easily dismantled by Mike. It suggested his prejudice lacked real hatred or malignancy.
Just ignorance then. But if we look closer at the context of the early 1970s, the alternative perspective seems, well, maybe more compelling.
I think so. This other view positions Archie as more of a pathetically displaced historical loser, a simpleton, in a way, who was retrograde, incapable of dealing with the modern world. He represented that segment of the white working-class male population who felt utterly left behind.
Left behind by what?
by the massive social upheavals of the 1960s, civil rights, a rise of second-wave feminism, the changing global economic structure. All of this had destabilized his identity, his sense of place in the world.
So he was clinging to the old order?
Desperately clinging to the traditional order that had always promised him, as a white male wage earner, at least a minimum level of status and power. The show positioned him in part as a victim of cultural progress, which paradoxically made him a relatable figure for people holding reactionary beliefs.
And Carroll O'Connor, the actor who played him, he navigated this internal conflict brilliantly, didn't he? He was apparently adamant that the show was satire.
Yes, he took the role with great seriousness, precisely because he wanted to present Archie's attitudes as inherently foolish.
And Lear intended the same thing.
That was the stated intention. Lear wanted Archie to be a satirically exaggerated parody, a caricature designed specifically to make racism and sexism look foolish. The problem, as we're about to explore, is that the humor, O'Connor's brilliant comedic performance, often eclipsed that message.
What's fascinating here, too, is how the creation of Archie fundamentally changed the rules for television characters. The sources argue he was really the first major TV character that, we weren't supposed to like, but couldn't help it.
Exactly. He established that archetype of the complex, often morally awful protagonist who you still somehow engage with. Critics and analysts frequently link him directly to later anti-heroes. People like the cynical cab dispatcher Louis De Palma in Taxi.
Oh, right, Danny DeVito.
Yeah. Or even stretching the comparison to more modern figures like Tony Soprano, Don Draper, maybe even Walter White. Archie made it acceptable, even desirable, to center a series on a character whose flaws were absolutely central to his being, rather than just tangential quirks.
That humanity, that relatability, even in the midst of all his offensive behavior, that seems to be the crucial hinge here. Are sources clear on whether this relatability made the satire stronger by holding a mirror up to the viewer, or actually weaker because it made the bigot too lovable?
The sources are definitely split on that. Which leads us directly into discussing the Archie Bunker effect. The very success of the character, his comedic timing, his verbal dexterity, even when mangling ideas, it created a kind of shield around him. Yeah. If Archie had simply been an object of pure ridicule, the satire might have worked more cleanly, perhaps. But because he was so charismatic, so engaging, the audience's affection often muddied the critical message. They felt perhaps respected by the material because it acknowledged their anxieties, their worldview, but they often seemed to miss the satirical barb aimed squarely at Archie's bigotry.
And this really gets to the core tragedy, if you want to call it that, of the show's original ambition. The writers, and Norman Lear specifically, often expressed deep disappointment about this.
They did. They lamented that what frequently happened was the precise opposite of their progressive intent. Many viewers seemed to reject the show's liberal mouthpiece and actually found their own bigotry reinforced instead of challenged.
The sources provide some pretty detailed structural reasons for why this satire might have backfired. And interestingly, much of the blame seems to fall, paradoxically, on the character who is designed to deliver the show's conscience.
You mean Michael Stivic? Meathead.
Exactly. Archie's progressive, educated, Polish son-in-law, Mike. He was supposed to be the voice of reason, right? The counterpoint to balance the family dynamic. Yet the critique of his character in the sources is surprisingly brutal.
It really is. Why did that progressive voice fail to land effectively with large segments of the audience? Well, the argument is that Michael was structurally flawed for comedy.
How so?
He was positioned as the voice of conscience, constantly challenging Archie's outdated views. But his role became painfully expected. Comedically, he often functioned simply to be shocked, or put the brakes on something, or chide. So think about the flow of an argument on the show. Archie would deliver some brilliant, unexpected, hilarious, and often deeply offensive line. The live audience would roar with laughter. Then the show would structurally have to pause for Michael to step in.
And deliver the rebuttal.
Right. With the predictable, ethically correct, and often quite dryly delivered rebuttal.
So he wasn't comedic relief. He was almost like the comedic brake pedal. He slowed down the momentum that the audience had just enjoyed.
That's a good way to put it. If the audience is conditioned to anticipate and maybe even reject that interruption, they might also be conditioned to reject the message along with the messenger.
Makes sense.
Yeah, our sources argue that Michael's lines were rarely funny. They were often preachy, predictable, and crucially, they slowed the narrative flow. All of this combined could make him seem, frankly, annoying.
And if a character is structurally designed to be annoying and predictable, even if his message is ethically sound,
he risks being tuned out. And this potentially enabled bigoted viewers to identify with Archie not as the object of ridicule, but as some kind of folk hero standing up to those preachy, bleeding heart, liberal, hippie leeches, meaning Michael and Gloria.
That identification even became a political statement for some, didn't it? The sources confirm that people genuinely bought Archie for president buttons, and not ironically.
No, absolutely not ironically.
Yeah.
As a genuine expression of their own sense of displacement and their frustration with what they perceived as political correctness run amok.
And that frustration, the sources argue, was often rooted in genuine economic anxiety. Archie resonated powerfully with the working class who felt stuck in dead-end jobs with little hope of upward mobility.
Right. They were often bewildered by the new rules of political correctness that seemed to constantly shift the goalposts of acceptable behavior. Archie gave voice to their confusion and their anger, often in a way that was perceived as just simple, unvarnished honesty rather than outright bigotry.
It's also noted in the sources that because Archie seemed to hate everyone, black people, Irish people, Polish people, feminists, hippies, you name it, he was sometimes dismissed as just an equal opportunity bigot. Did that allow viewers to sanitize his specific prejudices?
The sources suggest yes, it did for some. If he was just indiscriminately offensive, some viewers could argue that his core problem wasn't malice towards any specific group, but rather just a universal grouchiness and an inability to adapt to change. This kind of defense mechanism further diluted the intended satire.
However, the analysis can't just stop at this dichotomy of, Archie fans versus Michael fans. Perhaps the most important and maybe most overlooked finding in our sources is the existence and the behavior of what they call the transitional majority.
Yes, this group is absolutely key to understanding the show's actual nuanced impact. The transitional majority comprised the vast core of the American viewing public at the time, maybe 58 to 61% in some early studies.
So big a majority.
Solid majority. These were people who were neither hardline traditionalists nor fully committed progressives. They were sitting somewhere in the middle, and importantly, their values were highly fluid, still being formed or negotiated.
So what does the data tell us about how this group reacted? Did they show internal contradictions?
Oh, fascinating contradictions. For example, most of these viewers would state clearly in surveys that they liked Archie Bunker. They expressed affection for his character, his humor. Yet when polled on specific issues, say equal rights or race relations, a majority of that same group would also state that they disagreed with his political or social viewpoints.
So they could separate the man from the message in a way.
Exactly. They could engage with the show emotionally, enjoy the character, without necessarily endorsing the bigotry.
That's powerful. It suggests a more complex interaction than just reinforcement or rejection. So how did AITF function for this massive, undecided group?
Well, for this transitional majority, the show became a kind of catalyst for value negotiation in their own lives. Instead of having potentially painful, difficult, private arguments about the Equal Rights Amendment or race relations around their own dinner table, the bunkers were having it for them, right there on the screen every week.
Ah, so it externalized the conflict.
Precisely. The show offered frames and scripts for the negotiation of values in their personal lives. It depersonalized these highly charged conflicts and, crucially, injected humor, which, importantly, allowed families to actually discuss these topics without the conversation immediately breaking down into a personal attack.
And the show's specific vocabulary, dingbat, meathead, stifle yourself, it instantly entered the public lexicon.
It did. And it wasn't just language. It became a set of rhetorical tools. People could label and critique conservative viewpoints within their own families, often humorously, by referencing the bunkers. This sociological impact, this facilitating of conversation, might have far outweighed the show's success, or lack thereof, as pure satire.
So it wasn't necessarily changing hardcore minds, but it was teaching a transitional generation how to debate the previously undebatable.
Exactly. Making AITF an accidental, perhaps, but extremely effective engine of moderate social acceptance and discussion.
Now, one of the most common critiques you still hear about the show is that Archie never really changed. That he was basically the same bigot in 1979 as he was back in 1971, but the sources we looked at challenged this pretty heavily.
They do. They argue that this character evolution is actually one of the most underappreciated aspects of the entire series, primarily because it was such a long, slow burn process. We're talking over 10 years.
A decade-long arc, which in today's television landscape, where narratives often get compressed into single seasons, maybe even less.
It's almost unimaginable, isn't it? The show demanded patience from its audience. But over those years, spanning both All in the Family and then Archie Bunker's Place, the sources confirm genuine, specific changes in Archie.
Okay, let's run through some of those specifics then. Where did he actually soften his stance?
Well, he slowly but surely seemed to moderate his views on feminism, at least somewhat. He definitely rethought his position on the Vietnam War. His acceptance of homosexuals was perhaps the most tentative. Our sources note he sort of accepted their presence, even if he still wished they would just find a guy to be with.
Right, qualified acceptance.
Very qualified. But some of the most dramatic shifts often involved his interactions concerning race.
Ah, yes, I recall reading about the blood transfusion storyline.
Yes, that was a pivotal moment. Archie needed a blood transfusion, and it turned out he received blood from a black donor. Following this, the sources suggest he gained the courage to actually stand up to the local KKK organization. It provided this sort of physical, visceral connection to someone he previously despised, leading to a tangible internal change.
And the change continued demonstrably into Archie Bunker's Place, right? He didn't just grow internally. He started acting on that growth.
Absolutely. The ultimate physical demonstration probably occurred in Archie Bunker's Place when he actually punched a fellow lodge brother for making racist remarks, and then he promptly quit the fraternal organization.
That's not subtle.
No, that was Archie choosing his evolving personal values over his old tribal affiliation. He was also forced back into the role of being a more sensitive father figure when he took on the guardianship of his young niece, Stephanie Mills. That required him to curb some of his more extreme, volatile viewpoints for her sake.
And his economic status changed too, moving him beyond just the unhappy dock worker.
Right, that source of constant anxiety was partially resolved when he mortgaged his house characteristically without consulting Edith first, sticking to that patriarchal habit to buy Kelsey's bar and rename it Archie's Place.
Becoming a business owner?
Exactly, fulfilling a key masculine aspiration that had previously been a source of frustration for him. It moved him beyond the economic victimhood that had defined so much of his early character.
Now let's pivot to maybe the true quiet revolutionary of the Bunker household, Edith. Archie famously called her a dingbat, a word, as the sources confirm, that just soared into popular usage after 1971.
Incredible how that took off.
Yet, despite being presented initially as almost the antithesis of women's liberation, audience surveys consistently showed Edith as the most popular character on the show, especially among women viewers.
Her popularity was really significant. It signaled this deep-seated desire among many female viewers for change, maybe not radical change, but certainly relatable change. And the scriptwriters, to their credit, apparently listened.
How so?
They received thousands of letters from viewers, including many described as women lib-type letters. And this feedback prompted them to accelerate Edith's slow, quiet emancipation, often alongside her daughter Gloria.
Her transformation was incremental, wasn't it? Which probably made it seem more natural, more believable. What was the watershed moment in her journey towards autonomy?
The sources generally pinpoint the 1975-1976 season. That's when Edith, explicitly against Archie's wishes and opposition, took a paid job volunteering at the Sunshine Home.
A paid job.
Yes. Moving from a purely domestic role to one where she received a wage, even a small one, granted her a degree of economic independence she'd never had.
That seemingly simple decision, Edith taking a job, must have been a massive creative decision behind the scenes, given how fiercely the producers seemed to protect the show's delicate balance.
Oh, it absolutely was. There was genuine debate among the producers. They worried that viewers might criticize Edith for neglecting her household duties, which would inadvertently support Archie's traditional view.
But they went ahead.
They did. They rightly predicted, it seems, that the audience, especially that large transitional majority, would ultimately side with Edith's pursuit of individual self-fulfillment.
And this journey culminated in that truly iconic confrontation where she finally broke from total submission.
Ah, the beer refusal. Yes, the moment when she flatly refused to fetch Archie's beer on command. She stood up to him face to face and declared, "I ain't taking no orders," before slamming the door right in his face.
And the audience reaction?
According to accounts, the studio audience's reaction was explosive. Just huge cheers, whistles, and claps. The audience was actively, vocally endorsing her moderate rebellion.
But the sources are careful to distinguish the type of victory this was, right? This was a victory for a certain kind of feminism, one the production team felt was marketable.
Absolutely. The producers explicitly favored a moderate liberal approach that scholars now often define as therapeutic feminism.
Therapeutic feminism.
Yeah, it focused intensely on individual self-fulfillment. Things like assertiveness training, Edith taking piano lessons, finding personal options for growth. They essentially sanitized the concept for mass consumption. They deliberately avoided the more radical feminist elements of the time, like collective protest or a direct ideological fight against patriarchy and capitalism. They wanted to ensure the message appealed to the mainstream viewer who wasn't ready for, or maybe interested in, a full cultural revolution. And that slow, deliberate pace of change we saw within the show, both for Archie and Edith, it wasn't an accident. It was actually the result of Norman Lear's quite explicit agenda-setting policy. Lear and his team clearly understood that television could be a powerful tool for social engineering, not just passive reflection of society.
That sounds less like typical network television production and more like, well, genuine production activism.
Yeah.
How did Lear actually formalize this process? Did he have people dedicated to it?
He did. He employed Virginia Carter, who was a physicist and notably a former chairwoman of the National Organization for Women, NOW, in Los Angeles. Her title was Director of Creative Affairs.
Okay.
And her specific role was to actively work with pressure groups and source material directly from various social movements. Lear's production company became one of the first to implement this kind of structured long-term strategy to systematically, as one source puts it, milk the ideas of countercultural and subcultural minorities for mainstream television.
And the extent of this political and social commitment is really evidenced by their financial actions too, isn't it? The show wasn't just talking about change, it was literally funding it.
That's right. When Gene Stapleton's beloved character Edith died in 1980, which is a huge cultural moment in itself, the production firm, Tandem Productions, made this spectacular corporate gesture. They donated a massive $500,000 to NOW's Legal Defense and Education Fund.
$500,000.
$500,000, specifically earmarked for the Equal Rights Amendment effort. At the time, the sources confirmed this was the largest single corporate gift ever made to the women's movement.
That is just an astonishing level of commitment to a movement that Archie himself, certainly early Archie, would have absolutely scorned.
Completely. And beyond political finance, they also leveraged the show's platform very consciously for public health awareness.
Like the breast cancer storyline.
Exactly. The 1974 storyline where Edith found a lump in her breast is cited as a public health landmark. That episode alone reportedly generated thousands of calls to the American Cancer Society from concerned viewers. The show even received an award for delivering a crucial fear-reducing message, normalizing the idea of self-checks and seeking medical help. Again, proving the power of AITF as a dissemination engine for important information.
And perhaps the most difficult, most controversial social issue the show tackled directly was in 1977, focusing on sexual violence, featuring a man attempting to rape Edith.
Yes, that was hugely controversial. That episode was apparently developed over an entire year and in close collaboration with the Santa Monica Rape Treatment Center. The production team's explicit goal was to challenge the prevalent TV depictions of rape at the time.
How so? What were they challenging?
They wanted to counter the way television often blurred the line between sexual passion and violence, sometimes even romanticizing assault.
And by making Edith the target, a character who wasn't a stereotypical victim, not young, not conventionally alluring in the TV sense, they framed rape clearly as an act of violence, not passion.
Correct. The sources highlight that the intention was to encourage women to report sexual violence and also to accelerate the debunking of old, damaging myths surrounding rape. It was a conscious, careful use of the medium to drive social education, although again, they carefully avoided using the episode to launch broader, perhaps more alienating criticisms of patriarchy itself, sticking to those therapeutic feminism boundaries.
What's fascinating when you look at the totality of its impact is how AITF wasn't necessarily always a pioneer of brand new values, but it was perhaps the ultimate popularizing engine.
That's a great way to put it. It took concepts like, say, the LeMay's method for childbirth, or assertiveness training for women, or breast cancer awareness ideas that had often been circulating in countercultural groups or feminist circles, and it brought them into the mainstream living room. It debated them, normalized them, made them topics of national conversation.
And this normalization fundamentally changed the landscape of American television, didn't it? AITF really cracked the door open.
It blew the door open for an entire generation of working-class, issue-driven sitcoms that followed. You had the immediate spin-offs that flourished, Maude, The Jeffersons, but also that whole wave of similar shows like Sanford and Son, set in a junkyard, or Good Times, set in the Chicago projects.
It created space for what came later, too, particularly maybe a new kind of female protagonist on television.
Indeed. The legacy of Edith's quiet emancipation and sort of grounded realism arguably paved the way for what some call proletarian feminism,
Huh.
seen much later in the 1988 series Roseanne.
Ah, Roseanne Connor.
Exactly. Roseanne worked those unstable, thankless, pink-collar service jobs, and crucially, she had no aspirations towards upper-middle-class culture or that kind of sanitized perfection you saw in earlier sitcoms. She was messy. She was real, in a way that Edith helped make possible on prime time.
And the Archie Bunker anti-hero template, that remains essential to satire even today, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The sources specifically point out that the character Eric Cartman in South Park was heavily inspired by Archie Bunker.
Really, Cartman.
So they say. It shows the enduring success, and maybe the enduring challenge, of centering political satire on a deeply flawed, often awful, but undeniably charismatic figure, even if that figure risks being misinterpreted or, well, beloved for all the wrong reasons.
So looking back over this deep dive, the true legacy of All in the Family really seems to be its complexity. It wasn't just one thing, was it?
Not at all. It functions simultaneously as this highly effective mirror for conservative identification for some viewers, and yet, through that slow, decade-long evolution of Archie and the quiet, persistent growth of Edith, it also acted as a genuinely moderate and effective engine for cultural change, particularly concerning women's roles in public health awareness.
The genius and maybe the risk lay entirely in that timeline, didn't it? Archie's evolution from that fearful, bigoted dock worker to a bar owner who literally punches a racist that took over 10 years, spanning two separate series, to achieve what we might now call redemption, or at least significant growth.
And that required extraordinary commitment, not just from the production team, but from the audience, too, sticking with the character through that much gradual change.
Which leaves us with this provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. The bunker's iconic armchairs are now preserved in the Smithsonian Institution. They're part of America's national heritage, representing perhaps a fading era of patriarchal authority.
So think about this. In today's media environment, so often defined by instant gratification, by binge-watching entire seasons in a weekend, by ever-shortening attention spans, could a character whose redemption and social education required over 10 years of dedicated weekly viewing ever achieve that same profound, slow-burn cultural impact?
It really forces us to question the viability of nuanced, long-form character evolution and satire in our current media age. Can patience still be part of the equation?
A challenging question. If this deep dive into the source material has sparked further interest for you, or maybe raised new questions about the show's complicated legacy, we definitely encourage you to subscribe, like, and comment. Share your own thoughts on the profound and, well, paradoxical Archie Bunker effect.
Thank you for listening to VSOW.